In this video, we will see how to create pause, resume, and reset buttons. For this application, we will use the same design as our previous application. The only difference is that we will use two buttons for this application. We will use a start button and a reset button. This application has the same goal as the previous one, but with a pause option, a resume option, and a reset option. The first thing we do is create a startup function to create our Arduino object. We need to create a property because we want to create the connection with the Arduino once and for all. This will avoid issue with clearing and creating the Arduino object. Now we can create the Arduino object. We use the syntax app.a equals Arduino. When the function starts, we don't want the user to be able to click on the reset button. This will avoid potential issues. To do so, we use the syntax app.resetButton.enable equals off. Now we can program the callback function for the start button. In this function, we paste the display variable that we copy from the application we did before. Now we want to program what will happen when the user presses the button when it displays start. So we type if strcmpi app.start button text, start. This part of the program will run only if the user presses on the start button when it says start. When the button start is pressed, we want to change what it says on it. We want it to display stop. Now we want to be sure that the user can't use the reset button while we are acquiring data. Syntax, we use app.resetButton.enable equals off. Now we can start the stopwatch timer by using the tick function. Now we copy our while loop from our previous application. The only thing we need to change is the condition to enter the loop. We will enter the loop only if the pause button has not been pressed. To do so, we will need a new variable. If it equals 1, that means the pause button has been pressed. The variable equals 0 otherwise. We will use this variable in several functions, so we need to make it global. So we add it as a property. And we correct the syntax in our program. Now we need to specify what will happen when the stop button is pressed. The stop button is actually the same as the start button, the only difference will be its label. To program some lines that only run when the pause button is pressed, we type if strcmpi app.startButton.text, stop. When the pause button is pressed, we want the display to pause, so we turn the value of the doPause variable to 1. Now we need to set up what will happen when the user presses on the stop button. When the button stop is pressed, the doPause variable will equals 1, so we will exit this while loop. Once we stop plotting our graph, we want the start button label to show as resume. And we want the user to be able to use the reset button. Now we want the plotting to happen when we press the start button or the resume button. So we add to our condition or strcmpi app.startButton.text, resume. When the user presses on resume, we want the doPause variable to go back to 0 in order for the plotting to start again. As we will use the voltage and time vector in several functions, we need to add them as properties. Now we can try to run the application. We can see that when we press on start, the curve appears. When we press on stop, the plotting stops. For now, we can't press on reset because we have not created a callback function yet. But we can see that if we press on resume, what we display make no sense. It is because we did not erase the value we already displayed. We will create a new variable to know if we are resuming the plotting. This way we will be able to know if we need to erase the vectors. It will be equal at 1 if we need to erase the vectors, and 0 otherwise. If we press the resume button, we will need to erase the data, so the variable value will turn to 1. To know what is the label of the button when it is pressed, we use strcmpi and .text. If the do resume value equals 1, we need to erase the data in the vectors. That's why we create this if condition. We also change the variable back to 0 because the vectors no longer need to be cleared. Let's run the app. When we press on Start, we can see that our application is working as well as before. It stops when we press on the Stop button. And when we press on Resume, we are now plotting real new curves. But we are plotting from the beginning of the graph, and we would like to plot from where we stopped our previous recording. It is because we clear the time vector and do not keep the last value and start plotting from this value. To correct this problem, we can remember the time when we stopped the recording and start the next recording from this value. To do so, we need to store this value in a variable and add it to the current time. Once the user press on Stop, we need to get the current time and store it in the variable. We use talk. We also need to initialize this variable at 0. As we will use this variable in several functions, we need to create a property. We correct the syntax. Let's run the application. We can see that our problem is solved. But if we resume it several times, the recording starts at the same point. We can correct it just by making sure that we get the period of time between the very first start of the application and the last user stop. Let's run the application. Now, our application is working properly. The last thing we need to do is to program the callback function for the reset button. We add the callback function. The first thing we want to do when the reset button is pressed is clearing the graph. To do so, we type CLA app.UI axis. Then we erase the data in the voltage and the time vector. We set the time when the user stopped the function back to 0. We don't want TE user to press several times on the reset button. We change the label of the Start button back to Start. We can run the application one last time. Everything works with our application.